What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another episode of Kerbal Space Program 2, KSP 2. And we are currently on a series about just getting used to it again. Played a lot of KSP 1. And the mission for today, or the operation for today, is Operation Duna. So you can see we have the satellite set up ready to go, my own little satellite set up ready to go. And I'm just adding an extra, well, I've just added an extra bit of delta V to that. About 9,000 meters per second should be enough to get us to Duna and a polar orbit. The idea behind that is then that we can set up the satellite for a relay, but also get some photography of the planet itself and an image of the planet. As it transpires, we don't actually have the capability in terms of antenna. Now remember, I am playing with the mod that makes it so that if I don't have a signal, I can't do anything. That bites us. If you're playing along without that mod, of course, you'll be fine. But Duna is about, depending on where it is in its orbit, it is about, or a maximum of 25 million meters away, I think is what the number is, or 25 gigameters. And our antenna, the one that's on the top of there that you can see, that's not got a shell on it, which is ridiculous because that wouldn't fly like that. Hopefully I noticed that. Anyway, it's got a maximum of 15, so nowhere near. So we need to bridge that gap. Now the upgrade for the antennas and the relays is way off. It's about 4,500 to 5,000 science points away. So we need an infrastructure, though it's awkward with an orbit, because if you do it on a planet, obviously the planet's going around its own orbit, and the planets aren't following each other, or they are, but they're not in the same speed. Obviously, the closer a planet is to Sol, the sun, the faster it's going. So fixing the fairing there so that it makes sense that we're not going face first into atmosphere, that would be terrible. And we've got some sort of angle now too as well. You need to wait for the best angle to leave for a planet. Of course, if the planet's behind you, it's really awkward to get to. Now, I'm no expert, as I have mentioned before, so if I can't use the aids to aid for me, I like to get into an orbit, whether it be 80 to 100,000 meters, the standard orbit. Anything above 70, of course, is space, 70,000. And then I can go from there and fudge it as I like. Launching directly into the right inclination and orbit to then go to another planet is a lot more complex. So I get into an orbit, and then from there I can make it go along. Remember, there is no food, water issues here. The Kerbals can't or won't die, so that doesn't matter. Again, getting used to the system and the new KSP2 variants of the screens and the options that we have in terms of mods. So with a bit more manoeuvring on the manoeuvre node and throwing it around a little bit from an orbit, as I said, we have a intercept now with the planet Duna. Obviously getting an intercept with Duna is nice. We then go out to that area. We can then create a node that is around the periapsis of Duna, which is the lowest point that we pass the planet in its sphere of influence. Then you can retrograde, is the simplest way of saying it, and gain a orbit. Now, luckily we came in low. I am going to be honest and say that that was an accident. We need to be in a polar orbit anyway, and this is pretty much there, as you can see. I'm not even going to correct that. I'm going to leave it as is. That was an accident. Usually I come in equatorial, as in around the edge, these sideways. Difficult to say, obviously, space. There is no up, down, left and right in space. It's all relative. But yeah, so we accidentally came in on a reasonably good polar orbit, which is what we need, both for the relay, but also for the scanning setup. Locking that in now, the blue line means that we are here. It is actual, whereas the orange was predicted. This orbit, although is polar, is humongous. We do not need a polar orbit of that magnitude. We need the polar orbit to be about 500,000 to 800,000. Depending on the planet's preference for the scanning. Now, Duna, I believe it's 500,000. So easy enough to bring that down. From the periapsis or the apoapsis, you can do a retro burn. That will bring its opposite. So at periapsis, you will bring down its apogee, and at apogee you will bring down its periapsis, both in turn taking your time, not to worry too much. Doing it at any other place will be very inefficient, and it will make your orbit go on the wonk. And there we go, tidying it up finally now to a nice stable orbit of around 850,000 by 850,000. Nice orbit, but it is actually too far out for the orbital scanner, which gives us our orbital image of the planet. Just going to check that now, but you can see above max altitude. Scrolling down, you will see the ideal is 300k, the maximum is 500k. So, stage 2 of Operation Duna, though this was unexpected. This is an additional satellite because the range of the one in Duna is slightly out, and depending on the orbits or the actual location of Kerbin and Duna, there is no signal. Sometimes there is a signal. So what I'm going to try and do here is put a satellite in an orbit of Sol. So instead of this satellite following any of the planets, i.e. Kerbin or Duna, this is going to be in its own orbit, just like the planets are around Sol, the Sun. Hopefully this will bridge the gap midway between Duna and Kerbin, because that's where I'm going to put it. Again, it doesn't work as I wanted it to, because the planets still move in different patterns, and eventually they'll be too far away from each other to bounce it off this satellite, but it will give more options of a signal. So it's progress, but not quite good enough. Of course, the fix is an upgraded antenna, which we do not have. And with that now in a Sol orbit around the Sun, we can see, looking at our in range, we currently have what looks like Moon Polar, and I can't remember what the other one was, I missed it unfortunately, but we're seeing that we are in and out of range depending on the orbits again. But this is in between Kerbin and Duna now, so we're progressing. Likely the solution here is actually going to be that we fudge our way to Duna, get the quest, which is 2,000 science points. Now the good thing about that is you need a Kerbal. A Kerbal doesn't need a signal to fly shit because they are flying it themselves, so that won't be an issue. We won't be able to send any science back, but the quest, you only need to do it, get to the monument, and you get 2,000 points that you can collect from mission control. We won't be able to get any of the science back because the ship that I build will likely not be able to return from Duna yet, but we can send a rescue mission out to collect that without any issues, I hope. So just for Duna, I am actually going to create a brand new lander all along the medium sizing, including the brand new medium landing legs that we now and finally have. So the idea here is to give it a simple lander that can get the Kerbal down to the surface of Duna. Duna does have an atmosphere, so a suicide burn isn't your best option, although it can work depending on your thrust. For Duna, I am going to use parachutes because parachutes work. There is an atmosphere, and if you chuck a few on, because although it has an atmosphere, it's quite a thin atmosphere. So the thinner the atmosphere, the more parachutes you need, because the more they need to grab. So I'll chuck on 6 or 8 parachutes, I think, and hope for the best. We should obviously get a landing as close as possible to the monument, so I have to walk as little as possible. And then from there we get free science points from mission control. The Kerbal can then walk back to the ship, this ship that we're building now, and wait out a rescue. And there we go. 3, 2, 1, go. Almost nailed the time in there, about a second there. Anyway, not going to show you the whole launch, of course, but just the launch from the launch pad, because this is a new rocket, as I said. Slow start, low thrust to weight on the very beginning. Thrust to weight ratio being how much force it's got versus how heavy the ship is. But we will get there, and there is a decent amount of fuel on here. Asparagus staging as always, and there is 6 boosters around that center core. That then breaks up into 2 other sections, and then finally the lander. Now the lander does have a heat shield that can be disconnected just in case the weight is a problem, because it's a bit of math, a bit of guessing, more guessing than math probably, but anyway. So the idea is that if the booster and the science stuff is just too heavy for a safe landing on Duna, I would rather just land with the pod, the heat shield to help in case we come in too fast, and then the parachutes. Again, there is no life support on this, so it's not a problem. It's nice and simple. We can dump him on the planet and leave him there for a few decades if we wish, until we get around to rescuing him. Though the important factor is there is liable to be quite a lot of science waiting with him as well, probably 1,000 or more. So that is a decent amount, especially when we need about 4,000 to 5,000 to get to the next bits that we need to unlock. So with a safe launch and orbit obtained, I'm now playing around with the maneuver node to try and get us into a transfer that takes us to Duna. The best, easiest transfer, of course, is the Hoffman maneuver. I don't have the ability to press the button to do that just yet, so I'm figuring it out myself. A lot of clicking, resetting, you know, this is how I do it, so hopefully if you guys do it too, don't feel so bad. A lot of the ones I've watched, they know what they're doing right. Scott Manley and a few others, they make it look easy. Now I suppose when you understand the principles of rocket science, it is, but up until that point for me, it is just click a button and see if the maneuver node goes in the right direction. If it doesn't, then you click the opposite, because then it will go in the right direction. And with a bit of playing and poking and prodding, we now get the match planes and everything's done, so we can do the Hoffman transfer, which should put us into matching up with Duna. Trying to figure that out myself was painful, if I'm honest, and I will need to do a bit more research in understanding it a bit better for when they finally do the life support. Alternatively, I'll just have to build a ship that gives them 100 years of life support, because that's just how long it's going to take me to do the math on the orbital trajectories anyway. But there we go, we have a intercept with Duna now, so the next part is reasonably simple, and that part is waited until you get there, which is a few orbits ahead of us. But when we get there, we then just need to burn retrograde at the periapsis to get an orbit on Duna, and from there we can look at then aiming towards or around the monument. And arriving at the sphere of influence of Duna, we can just do now nice simple retro burn. Now you can, and I do create a maneuver node because I just have something that does the node for me, just to make life simpler. I can have a drink of my tea, etc. while it's doing it. As long as I'm doing the math myself, I'm happy with that. And you can see it's just a retro burn to slow you down, and by slowing down, the sphere of influence from Duna will capture you. We then just need to work out from there where the monument is and how we want to burn into that. Remember though that the planet is always turning, so if you aim directly for the monument, likely it will be way ahead of you by the time you actually land. And the pain of that is as such. So you can see we are coming into an intercept, crash landing there on Duna, though it won't be a crash because we have parachutes and boosters, etc. But just playing around now with the controls on this maneuver node, we want to get that to the monument there. You can see it's the orange dot. Again, keeping ahead of it and understanding and predicting the planet turning versus when you're actually going to arrive there. There's smarter people than me that can teach you to do that. For me, I just wing it based on, I go way ahead, as you can see there. I then allow that to happen and maneuver node to trigger. On that basis, I see how fast the planet turns. I then do one last maneuver node that, using that knowledge, gets me roughly bang on. By bang on, anything within 10 kilometers is bang on for me. On Kerbal Space Program 1, there was a trajectory thing that showed you the planet included the planet turning. I missed that because that made my life a lot easier. There were also mods that landed for you, but that was too much even for me. And just for the final maneuver to hone in that. See, we're only 130,000 meters above the planet, so it's not going to turn much now. We are very close, but I could just burn that over just to make sure it raises up to match the plane of the monument, and from there then we'll just chuck it down on a landing. Coming in hot, and it is a bit dark. I will lighten it up in post-edit as I'm talking now, but there you can see the parachutes have propped. And we're coming in at about 16, 17 meters a second. Now, realistically, that is a little bit faster than you want to. You want to come in between 8 and 10 is your maximum, I would say. All parts have different settings, though, of course. And there is a heat shield still on the bottom of this. You can't eject it. I've just tried. You can't. That's annoying. Heat shields are very heavy by design. It's how they work. It's how they keep you in the right orientation. But it's also how they burn off their material to actually cause the cooling. 30 meters to go. We're about to go plop, and there we go. Landed sideways. Not the end of the world. It was slow enough that it didn't cause any damage to the ship. We lost the antenna, but realistically the antenna was out of range anyway, and we're going to be rescuing it. So there is no reason for that antenna in this circumstances. We already know that was a fail, and we need to send a rescue mission. 4,500 kilometers away from the monument. It's a walk. I accept that. But again, for me, 4,500 kilometers from the abyss of space, I'm going to take it. So before I do anything, I'm going to wait for the sun to rise a little bit just to make it better. I don't have to do any post-editing there. Looking stunning, actually. There, the morning, you can see the ground. Even though we know Duna is a dark orangey terracotta colour, the sun rising over there makes the ground look blue. Unless my eyes are broke, that looks bluish to me. Bit mimosy. Looks less blue over there. I actually looked there because I was confused by why the floor looked blue. Anyway, let the sun come up a little bit more and you will see Duna come into its own as it should be. Clouds, sky, orange and yellow, ground, orangey red. Stunning. Now all we need to do is a very long walk. 4,500 meters to be exact. I'll see you at the monument for Operation Duna. Welcome to the Duna monument. Obviously, we are on its backside at the minute, and I didn't know, so bear with me while I try and play around to get a decent screenshot. I'm not going to bore you with that too much, but we'll have a look around now and walk around to the front. Very shiny crown ring looking thing there. There we go. We're at the front now, and there you go. It is someone's face, and that is a crown buried in the sands of Duna. Very Mars looking. Very nice, very done. And obviously, while I was walking around there, we got the quest complete. So that is 2,000 science points achieved there. Now, the poor little Jebediah needs to run another 4,500 meters back to the pod to wait for rescue and the collection of the science, which equates to about 1,100 additional science. But we need to return it or transmit some of it if we get a signal. And here we are back at the hab-ish. Almost there anyway. So with Jebediah safe in the capsule waiting for us to rescue him, we can now claim our reward, which is 2,000 science. I don't read any of that. I know it's probably really bad. I'm sorry, but it's waffle. Anyway, coming in, the next one, of course, is getting a probe core now to a range of 86. So that's the upgraded antenna we need. And we get 5,000 for that. There's 3,000 there for returning from the atmosphere of Joule as well. Eve's sphere of influence for another 3,000 science. 3,000 science for landing a vessel on Duna with 300 tons or more, which we'll achieve with the rescue. And land on Ike with at least a crew of 3, which we can probably try and do at the same time with that Duna landing, etc. With all of that said, we now have 2,261 science, so let's see what we can spend that on. The lower end stuff there that we can learn is for aircraft. That's for atmospheric aircraft. I'm not looking at those just yet. I'm more interested in rocketry and traveling further afield, i.e. our next step is, of course, dual. So what I'm going to use for the science is modular launchers, which unlocks tier 3, which takes us into where we need to be for our antenna that we need, but we're still many thousands of science away. And I'm also going to go then back to level 2 and learn the Xenon, depending on where you're from, propulsion, because that gives crazy delta V that I will show you before we close off the episode that is Operation Duna. So quickly just jumping over to the build menu, we can see for the Xenon engine you need first the engine, of course, very small. You can use multiples of them, they do stack. The two problems with Xenon is that they are very slow and they require a lot, and I am not exaggerating, they require a lot of electricity, with a thrust in the vacuum there of 0.2 kilonewtons. So they are very weak, but very efficient. So if we just grab a quick pod now, any pod, doesn't really matter what, just as the example for giving us the stats on delta V, and on that pod we chuck on a large Methalock tank with the most efficient small Methalock engine we have. Give it a few seconds and you can see there that we have 2,725 meters per second for this ship in its current state. So imagine that in space, 2,700 meters per second, which is enough to get from Kerbin orbit to the moon, maybe. Not quite Minimus, certainly not landing on either. Now, if we go over to the Xenon fuel tank, we'll grab that, chuck that on. That's the largest one we have available to us at the moment, and then throw on a Xenon engine. There you go. 43,512 meters per second. Now in space that can get you anywhere, any of the planets in our current system under Sol. You will be able to get to them with that delta V without question. The furthest possible planet, which I believe is Dres, you only need about 11,000 delta V to get there. Remember though that this has almost no thrust, and in doing so you won't be able to land, but you will certainly be able to maneuver around in the vacuum to all of the planets, probably with just this one shuttle, but it would be very slow. Hopefully that gives you some indication. It's very brief, very you know, structured, but that's the difference, and that's huge. Same as nuclear engines also provide many amounts, thousands of delta V, but with very little thrust. Xenon takes that to another level altogether. Now just playing around with the hydrogen engines. Didn't even realise I'd learnt them, to be honest. Not interested in them too much. They are efficient in space, but not so with the thrust, but they look cool as well. But we are going to end the episode here. We have completed Operation Duna for the fact that we want. Next is dual to get the science to give us the better antennae so we can get some better satellites made. Thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, please click like. Any comments are welcome. As always, join us on Discord. Subscribe for more. Like if you like. Take care. Goodbye.